Christian.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Bed Boys, your one-stop shop for all your energy drink reviews and performance talks. I'm Christian,
I'm Brian.
and today we got a banger of an episode as usual. We got a very special guest on the podcast. It is Greg Torcaso, a good friend of both of ours, me and Greg. Greg and I interned actually at the same time when we were both at Elon, and he's now at Towson working with football, softball, a couple other sports. So, Greg, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Give us a little elevator speech of how you got into performance, because I know you have somewhat of a unique journey there, and just what brought you to where you're at today.
I heard he kicked at Maryland. Is that
Yeah,
true?
shocker, right? Shocker, right? Yeah, my 1 year glory stop at Maryland. My career kind of began more so in soccer, and then I shifted into football when I got cut from DC United. So I was playing academy level there, and they basically told me I wasn't athletic enough. So that kind of started my rise into more strength training, performance training, stuff like that. So I've shifted towards that realm. I had some great coaches along the way. Justin Kavanaugh was like my first real performance coach. He trained Johan Blake for a while as well. So that was a really good introduction. He's actually had a higher career, positive impact on my career than I think he even knows. So I think that's a cool benefit of that. But I ended up actually being more interested in physical therapy. I was exposed to some really good sports PTs with the amount of injuries I had. I broke my back. I had a hip labral tear, a couple other crazy injuries. So I had really good sports PTs that actually integrated performance in that rehab side really, really well. And that got my interest really peaked into that side of it. But I always kind of knew performance was where I wanted to go. Prior to interning at Elon, I had been accepted into physical therapy school at Pitt. After talks with Brian and Gabe, halfway through my internship and the job opportunities I had, I turned that down and took this role at Towson working with football and a couple other sports. So yeah, that's kind of been my journey up until this point.
Do you feel like you made the right decision?
That's funny. It's funny because this would have been, I think a couple weeks ago, would have been my graduation date from PT school. And I would have been in $100,000 worth of debt. So I would say, yeah, I do think I made the correct decision.
I love the way you frame that.
They're not the first person to ask me that. My parents asked me that the other day. You would have graduated from PT school yesterday. And I was like, yeah, I don't regret leaving PT behind at all.
I think a lot of people get faced. I mean, we probably see at least one a year. Ironically, last year in the internship, we had a dental school versus strength conditioning. So a little bit further apart, at least PT school and S&C are at least kind of adjacent versus dentistry and that. But that's what we do. We convert kids from wanting to chase other dreams and just wanting to be sports performance coaches. And then we take them in as children.
Oh, all right.
What going off that background and you being interested in physical therapy, how do you think, because obviously you can't just get into PT school without doing the prerequisites and doing all that stuff, how do you think that background has helped you as a coach, having a little bit more deeper understanding of okay, what goes into wanting to be at PT school, and how has that helped you as a performance coach, or has it helped you?
I think the route up to it, I think for me was a little bit unique because I did a more heavy science base in my undergrad because, PT school requires physics and anatomy and stuff like that, obviously, but, I was more hands-on with the classes that I took. And so I think my understanding of biomechanics, physics, anatomy, and physiology, really allowed me a bigger perspective of movement. And then combining that with all of my practical experiences, because you have to do a certain number of observation hours before you go to physical therapy school, we're all within sports PT. I did not do a single hour in an ortho clinic or somewhere where it wasn't working with athletes. So I was applying that information to athletic populations with people that had done that at a high level. And so for me, I think the bridge, combining those two routes, the practical side, the science, how can we put that into how you view movement, has really helped me the most in how I kind of frame like my coaching eye. And then I think when you look at the rehab process, it's kind of guided me into my role here where I work with our football teams very heavily with return to play. I'm like our lead point with our athletic trainer for that. I handle most of our long-term rehabs for football. And I mean, that I think having that base, the knowledge and the people to reach out to if I need help always has been like a massive part of like just being good at my job.
I will say this. I think this is great right now. However, we did miss the beginning part of this podcast. I just realized this. Greg, what are you drinking right now?
Dude, I texted you about it. I had to pick up a banger. The Jolt Cola, the
Whoa,
OG
what is
from
that?
Redcon 1, the original.
Give me the supplement facts on that right now. I need to know what's in it. Give me the opinions on the first impression on the can, and then
Well,
we'll jump back
you're gonna
into
be you're gonna be highly disappointed because it's got a proprietary blend.
lame.
But 200 milligrams of caffeine. I'm sure it has 1,000 grams of or 1,000 milligrams of taurine. It has L-carnitine in it. Alpha GPC. I know you guys are big fans, and I think that's all it's got right here. So
Okay. I've never even heard of that drink, to be honest with you. So,
I've seen the Redcon One energy drinks. They're far less common. Seeing them everywhere. I actually went to my vitamin shop to see if we had them. They didn't even have them.
I told you
Um,
I had to pick up something unique.
was that? Did you
I've
pop that
only,
top?
I just did, yeah.
That's a
oof.
really sad pop. I heard it.
I've
Give me
only
give me a
seen
sip.
like I've only seen like the Redcon one like pre-workouts that are like ready to drink. I haven't seen
The
like
like
the
Total
actual
Wars.
cans. Yeah, like the Total War. For those are pretty like hardcore, to be honest with you.
My number
They
one energy drink of all time is the Redcon 1 Sour Peach Rings, and I don't think they make it anymore. But that
neither
was
does
like an elite.
Alani Nu doesn't make their sour peach rings one either. And I have been an avid like not a fan of Alani Nu's
Hater.
rings. A hater, one would say. But they had a sour peach rings flavor back when they used to do the white cans. I brought this up a couple of times in the podcast. That one was such a critically like good like cornerstone flavor for them, and them getting rid of it, I think was like the turn of like it's going downhill.
They needed to rebrand after.
Yeah, I got something unique as well. Something we haven't tested at all on the podcast. Are you guys familiar with a guy named Jerry Rice?
Oh, I know exactly what you got. I know exactly what you got.
Oh
Little
boy.
little goat fuel.
Yes, sir. Yes, sirski.
Little goat
Maybe
fuel.
the best slash worst name for an energy drink on the market right now.
Dude, it's 200 milligrams of caffeine. Just a screaming cold can right now. I mean, the can's sweating. But GOAT stands for greatest of all time and our proprietary sports energy. Blend of natural caffeine, electrolytes, BCAAs, cordyceps mushrooms. That's kind of cool. You don't normally see that. Is just that goat fuel. Provides high performance energy and keeps you going on path to greatness. Zero sugar, no aspartame, or if you're a weirdo and you say aspartame, no high fructose corn syrup, non GMO, vegan, gluten free, banned substance tested by informed choice. That's kind of neat. Um, can looks neat. Cordyceps, I don't know how much is in there because again, Greg said it earlier. Why proprietary blends? It's just a way to hide things without giving the exact amounts. But it's 200 milligrams of caffeine, tropical berry flavor. Let's very sad pop as well. It smells like piss.
Did you pick this up at the old vitamin shop, Brian?
I got this at Harris Teeter.
Oh, excuse
The
me.
teeter.
The teeter that Harris is. 329 a can. So kind of expensive for a 12-ounce energy drink.
Especially at a grocery store.
Yeah. It's weird because it literally says like 0% juice, but it's so lightly carbonated, it tastes like it's just juice.
Okay, how's the flavor?
It definitely, you ever had, when, this is going to make sense for Christian here, but you know how Fit Aid kind of like, it's the natural flavoring? It tastes like that.
Yeah.
Not great.
Okay. Yeah. I have tried goat fuel. I think I had like they make like a gummy bear flavor, and I'm like, oh, the
I
Rain
almost
White gummy bear is like
almost
one
got the
of the
gummy
best
bear.
energy drinks
Yeah.
taste wise of all time. So I'm like, oh, this would be good. And I was like, it wasn't disgusting, but I wasn't impressed by it.
That's where I'm at with this. Now I did try the Gorilla Mind white gummy bear. The Rain is still better. The Gorilla
It's
Mind takes on like a more sweet.
okay.
I got very pineapple from the Gorilla Mine one.
Yeah, it's very very. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like sugary sweet
Yeah.
versus like the like tart one, like
I was
the
not a
Rain
fan.
one is. Now, what I want to get my hands on is the blue raspberry because Gorilla Mind is hyping up the blue ras.
Is
That
that
one's great.
new?
Yeah, it's brand new. It
Okay,
looks
because
delicious.
I've had like the I think it's just blueberry or just berry flavored,
The
and that one
triple berry,
smacks.
the
That
triple
one
berry is
smacks.
unreal. When you sent me that video of it, I went out to 4 different stores after we did that podcast, and I tried to get my hands on it. I finally got on like they had it at like this random nutrition shop in Greensboro, and I found it like immediately like cracked that thing open. I was like, oh, this lives up to the hype.
That's
Yeah,
what I
that
was trying to
was
get for this podcast, but my vitamin shop didn't have it yet.
yeah,
Vitamin
I've only
Shops got to
seen it
step it
like
up.
one place. Yeah. I keep I keep getting teased with like random Instagram posts of a Dr. Pepper ghost. I don't know if this has been popping up for you too.
I've seen it.
Um,
Every day on my feed, and I'm like, stop teasing me, just say it
yeah,
is.
it's like that. I saw someone made like an apple pie one. I don't know if that's actually like
Yeah,
that one was kind of random to me, but
I would
I,
give me the Dr Pepper. Just
I
give it
feel
to
like
me.
that's implied at this point with the
Need
new
that.
partnership. It has to be.
They keep posting like big things coming. I also think we're getting another sour strips flavor. Um, Max Tuning has talked about it. I think it's going to come out probably on like the anniversary of sour strips. I would assume that the old like the rainbow sour strips flavor gets like back in package, and then they bring out like a second one that's maybe like their strawberry flavor or like the melon like lemonade kind of flavor,
Mhm.
which I would crush.
That would be S
Melon's an
tier.
un- melon's an underrated flavor. Like when you see like a Korean soda that's in like that kind of like melon versus like just watermelon, underrated.
Yeah, if you do it right, especially.
Sorry, I totally sidetracked us. Let's get back to our regular scheduled programming here. Great.
Yeah, what the fuck were we talking about?
His rehab, basically
Yes.
him working with the rehab court as like essentially a rehab coordinator, being the first contact for the AT, having that being an influence back onto his career and having that background in more so like the PT kind of school. When you considered, how far you've come and changed essentially the way you've looked at, I guess, rehabilitating athletes, you're kind of doing a clinical sense in sports performance, kind of having a foot in both worlds without actually having a foot in both worlds, especially in collegiate. That's kind of what a rehab coordinator does when they're on a sports performance staff. When you're doing that, do you feel like this is going to sound weird, but do you feel like it becomes more of like that personal training, kind of like one-on-one stuff versus like coaching groups? And do you attack those two things differently, like when you're rehabbing an athlete versus when you're leading?
I think to a sense it can. I think it depends on the structure. Within like how we organize things, our goal is always a seamless transition from table to weight room. So that means like our athletic trainers, like their whole goal is like, how can we rebuild the movement patterns that they're going to utilize within the weight room? And so for me, when I get an athlete, it's like, hey, AT comes and talks to me. We have, say, like an ACL. He's 2 weeks out of surgery. All right, he's cleared to be in the weight room and do unaffected lead training. All right, it's like, all right, what's our regression that we need him to be on that's going to get him on the plan to get to the main program? And then what is the athletic trainer doing to get his affected limb to be ready for that first progression into the main program? So there isn't as much individual work within like the main session, which for me allows me to still like lead groups, lead sections of the lift itself. Where I tend to be way more hands on is when we get to the on field portion, especially within the season or within spring ball. Like within that 2 hour practice block, like we are hammering like all of our affected limb work there and then trying to get through that return to run progression. Like very, very base level. We could get hamstring guys 3 days out and start doing them on a dribble series, seeing where they can go, assessing their movement quality. We'll get them from that position and then take them all the way up to like max effort sprinting, skill, drill, chaos, back into practice. So that's kind of like the integration of all of it. It's not fully separate where like we're just one on one all the time. I think the only couple of times I've gotten based off time is usually in the summers or within camp, but it might be an extra session outside the lift. It's not necessarily taking away from like my chance to still be like a leadership role on the floor, which I think is kind of nice because I love both aspects of it.
Yeah, how do you, because I think recently strength coaches have been trying to play a bigger role in the return to play process as opposed to like solely having that handled by like ATC and medical. How did you, was that relationship of like, okay, like you and the ATs, was that kind of there when you arrived at Towson, or how did you build that and kind of integrate yourself into that kind of RTP role and being able to make that transition more seamless as far as like table to weight room and on field?
I think there was, I'll give our associate AD credit of like he's built a as close to a high performance model as I guess you could get at our level, where from the top down the goal is collaboration. So I think having somebody who's like oversight position to help with that creates more natural below the chain like conversations. I think within football, like Kyle, our athletic trainer, he's awesome and he's always open to like new ideas and talking. So like I would just pick his brain on like, hey, what he thought about this case, what he thought about that case. Hey, how can I help with this? How can I help with that? When I first got there, I think the collaboration, because I came in with a transition of strength coaches as well, there was previous collaboration there that was really good. So I think that was always like wanted, and that connection was like from both sides. It was like the ATs wanted to collaborate with us and we wanted to collaborate with them. Um, I think too, the biggest aspect for me that I think gained a lot of confidence from our athletic training staff was we had after our first year, like new coaching staff, new way of practicing. We didn't have everybody there in our summer, and our coaching staff just went ham in camp, and so we ended up with a significant number of soft tissue injuries and stuff like that. And that ended up being for me. I mean, at one point, I think in camp probably 3 weeks in, we had maybe like 10, 11, 12 guys in return to play on the sidelines. It's like, okay, we got to get these guys back. So if we don't have an organized structure of how we do our return to play, like we could end up losing weeks and then losing games. So how can we get that kind of as fast as possible in that transition while also making sure there isn't a re-injury down the line? And developing that system with them, I think was like a first introduction of like, okay, this guy wants to be involved, wants to include us. How can we get that bridge? And then going even further, we had one of our starting tight ends the next season who in the middle of the summer ended up with a stress fracture. I was like, okay, how can we get him back on the field because he needs to play? And so I kind of took that ownership from our weight room side, collaborated with our AT, and like we did catapult live track to make sure we tracked his volume every practice. We really went into detail and like, hey, what drill can he handle, progressing one by one, integrating him in with the coaches. And it was like he got back and didn't miss a beat the entire season, was available for every single practice game, whatever. And like we didn't even think that was going to be possible when we mapped out the process in the first place. So I think just having success and then being collaborative was like the two things that really created my role within the space of like, hey, being that first point of contact. Like, and I'll give Jake credit as my boss. Like he gave me that as a avenue for me to really explore. He wasn't like, hey, I'm going to take this. Like, that's not your job, whatever. He was like, no, like you're interested, go do it. Like, go make it happen.
So you kind of mentioned like the catapult live track. Like when you're looking at the rehab process and you start to pull in data from sports science and some of the tools that you have available, like what's the most integral? Like if you had to take three, obviously there's going to be 10 to 15 different metrics that you look at that all come together in this like amalgamation of like, is the entire essentially like player profile trending in the right direction? But if you were to pinpoint down to like three, say you move down to D3 and you don't have as much time, you don't have as many resources, what would you be tracking to make sure that you could progress that athlete back into practice?
If you still have GPS or
If
not,
you
no
still
GPS.
either or, either with GPS or without it, however route you want to take. But if you were in a very, maybe you're only 1 to 2 people on staff, you don't have the resources to continually go over and over again. Just from a time standpoint, what are you looking at to make sure that they can progress and kind of trend in that right direction?
I mean, within catapult metrics, the three I'm going to look at the most is going to be, total volume. So we look at total distance. I try to stay away from player load as much as I can with just like a more quantitative metric that I can be more actionable with and program off of. So total distance, high speed distance, I'll look at 70% plus for that because I think if you have an effort, sometimes if it's 80% plus, you're just not going to get a lot of yards listed there. So I look at 70% plus for that. And then XL, decel number of efforts. I think you can use those to kind of really dial in your programming and see, hey, was my dose good? Did I get the dose that I wanted on the catapult? And then kind of come back and see, okay, what was the response from the athlete from that? Can I progress them? Can I not? If I don't have technology, I'm looking at the volume, number of efforts of sprint work, distance of sprint work, and then I'm going to focus more in on what those, especially if it's a lower limb injury, like, hey, sharpness of angle, of change of direction, and then progression through skill drill chaos. Like, are we getting them closer to the demands of the game? Like, if I'm doing a closed cone drill, that's probably not going to fill the bucket of sending them out into, 7-on-7, skell, and like a live period. So how can I bridge that gap? That could be, box tackle drills, that could be mirror drills, that could be open space agility drills, but I need to get them from close change of direction to that. So I would look less at like specific, what is the amount of it that I'm doing. If it's more that, it's like, can they handle close change of direction? Yes. Can they handle close change of direction with more speed? Yes. Can they handle reacting to an opponent with only a couple of options? Yes. Then progress them through that and then make sure that they're getting those proper exposures.
Now, when you mentioned 70%, you're looking at like 70% of like that top speed of that like miles per hour, right?
Yeah. Max
Yeah.
velocity. Yeah.
So I would assume so that'll include, and you can be able to cross reference that with your total numbers of efforts in like an XL, just because, if you're looking at, say, the average play being 7 to 10 yards, depending on the offense, obviously, your defense that you run, you know, you're going to probably match almost 1 to 1 with that distance, as well as like the number of XLs, decels, if they can't get over 65% or 70% of their top speed in 10 yards. And obviously football, and if you're looking at just football as like a microcosm of this, in a field sport athlete, they're going to be far better accelerators. So it's likely that they're more efficient and kind of get up to that higher percent speed, but the distance at which they sprint will limit the top end exposure that they have. So I would assume like you're looking at this from more of an acceleration kind of standpoint, since they're not necessarily working into max V a ton of times unless you're in an offense that runs a ton of fly routes or you're in a defense that's getting beat a lot.
Yeah. And I think I also use it to like cross reference with if it is a player that's been in catapult with us for a while. I mean, even before I got here, it was 70% plus was the metric that had been used. So I think if I was moving forward, I would look more at like the Altus speed zones for specificity of like what our running yards are. However, I just haven't experimented with that yet, so I'm open to ideas with it. But for 70% plus, from what I've seen, is exactly what you said. I mean, if I have a full max intensity effort and I'm sprinting 15 yards, and it's a guy whose max speed is like 22 miles an hour, he probably isn't going to get to what 75% would be around 16 to 17 miles an hour there. He's probably not going to get to that, or if he does, it's at the very tail end, and then catapult's just going to track 1 yard.
Yeah.
And like that doesn't really provide me with the context that I need, because that could be an exposure that hurts him. potentially if he's returning from a hamstring, like a full max effort ripped sprint for 15 yards, like he's going to start getting a little bit more upright position probably by 15 yards. Like I want to make sure I have something that's a little bit more actionable of like, hey, can I put this athlete out there and then see like, hey, he got 150 yards of high speed distance in quotes. And then I can see, okay, well, you got 150 yards here. Maybe that's where I should look at my programming compared with those XL decel efforts that we just looked at and see how many efforts do I need to get him to top up either the stuff he's not getting in practice or do I need to work him back towards in terms of the efforts number and then the speeds that he's getting to.
Yeah. Oh, Christian, you had something?
No, you can go ahead. I can wait.
Okay. All good. All good. Um, Basically, I was going to say, like, when you look at like max effort sprinting, especially in like the rehab, what does that really look like to you? Is that just ripping a rep, or is that some way that's you're kind of moderating it to be a little bit more in control of like the movement mechanics and going through that progression? Like,
Are you
whether it
saying
be a
from like the initial point of like injury
initial.
or?
So what does it look like when you are absolutely healthy? And then how do you regress each step? Say if you have like a hamstring.
Okay. So within like our general program, we tend to fly more than do like sprint float sprints or build up sprints. So the most we usually have worked up to, I think, in the time that I've been here, we've worked up to a 30-yard build, 10-yard fly. I think this summer we might be experimenting more with some 20-yard flies with a 20-yard build is like our top end of like what we're going to do. So I'll look, as you said, kind of like let's regress back. What can we start with? So if it is a hamstring, I want to get them on field as soon as possible, moving. What can they handle on a dribble series? Try to take them through like a walking dribble, ankle, calf, knee. If they can't get to a knee, all right, we know where they're at for the day, and then we just drill whatever they can do pain free. From there, I tend to try to follow like Jonas Dodu's what's it called, switching reactivity, and it's breaking my mind on the other one, but the PSR model basically of like I want to make sure that we are emphasizing those drill works that are going to try to transfer more because they tend to be a little bit more lower level to where I don't have to necessarily like pull back on what the athlete's intent needs to be behind the drill. So that could be like A switches, that could be dribbles. It could also be, extensive bounding, but I need their intent to be behind it. And then what we're going to do from there is going to build on. So I tend to look at the drills as our first base. How can we progress the drills to make more complexity, whether it be adding resistance, adding some kind of challenge to balance, etc. And then I want to transfer into light buildups as like my first kind of progression into a sprint. If it's a hamstring, I don't want them to be in that initial push off right away. I want to kind of get them through a buildup where they feel comfortable to kind of get to those positions. And we'll work the dribble as our more high intensity work of like, you can do a speed calf dribble where we're shortening that gait pattern. And then they're getting that nervous system stimulus of like those fast feet and frequency, but we're not necessarily covering a ton of ground where they're exposing that hamstring to a lot of risk. So our build-up sprint is going to be that chance to like finally cover some ground, but make sure they feel good with it. And then we'll progress from there. And then the goal is to get them back into whatever the main program is. So if we're doing 30-yard flies, 10-yard fly, 30-yard build, I want to get them to a 10-yard build, 10-yard fly, 20-yard build, 10-yard fly. And then I want to track that with some numbers. So I can say, hey, I want you to hit like 90% of what your PR was because we're lucky enough to have like the timing gates. So I have them go and rip a sprint through there. If they get to 90%, I'm like, okay, good. Let's get to 95%. If they can get to 95%, it's like, okay, good. Now I know I'm a little bit more comfortable with you going out there in our main session the next week, hitting a 30-yard build, 10-yard fly.
So you're almost mixing like the art of coaching and then having it be either negated or confirmed by the numbers that you're collecting versus vice versa, having it being completely led just by data and then coming back and being like, well, where can I kind of have some play?
I think it needs to be more data informed rather than data driven. I think like you have to have the coaching eye to be able to see what's going on. Like I could watch somebody accelerate on a sprint and I could see like maybe they're externally rotating through the left leg a significant amount, But like I had an ACL guy who couldn't even get full extension through his knee, and he was ripping 95% of his top, fly ever, but he was doing it with a limp. It's like, okay, like he's clearly visually not ready to sprint, but like if we're going solely off of data, like his catapult's going to say, he's probably accelerating with the same force he was pre-injury. His top speed on the gates is saying he's within 95% of what his max velocity was pre-injury. Like if that's
Yeah,
the
movement
case,
capacity.
yeah, something's missing. Something's not right. So you have to use a mix of the art and science to be able to figure out what is the problem. Um, if you can't do that, I think you probably are missing the mark because the data isn't going to tell you everything unless you have like something like speed sig or a 1080, and then you might be able to see those things a little bit more quantitatively.
But all those things are probably going to do is reconfirm what you're seeing with the coach's side, just with a higher dollar amount attached to it to get an objective piece of data versus it being subjective in the mind of the beholder.
Yeah.
So what I kind of got from that is like in the return to play process, you want the intent to be high, but you're going to manipulate constraints and variables to bring down the overall like intensity, so to say. Have you ever like experimented, like obviously your goal is to get them back into the what the team is doing, whether that's a fly, split foot sprint. With a hamstring RTP in particular, we know that most of the time people don't injure hamstrings in like the first 5 to 10 yards of a sprint. It's usually when they're more upright. Have you experimented with like short, like 5 to 10 yard like accelerations, whether that's resisted or unresisted, like early in like a hamstring RTP, because you know that one, not as likely to re-injure it there, and two, you can still get high intent without necessarily high intensity? Or what are your thoughts like on that?
No, I think we've done that before as well. I think that's absolutely on point of like that's a good start. I think it depends on your situation. Like, can you bring chains out to the field? Can you bring sleds out to the field? Can you do that within a practice without potentially like a coach getting mad at you for doing something that looks a little bit weird? I think it works easily. Like it's an easy way to add in some kind of higher intensity stuff as well, especially if you're within a short range. Yeah, I would definitely do that kind of stuff. I think it also gives you a chance to see how they interact with the ground under load. So it's another chance of like assessing like, okay, what does the foot look like? Is the foot collapsing when he's like pushing through load and having to like almost triple extend, right? Like I think you get a different visual because like if there is no like external resistance, like football at least as a sport, you are going to encounter external resistance. Now we could make the debate of like pushing against another human being or pulling a chain, but certainly like you're going to see how that athlete interacts with the ground under some load, which is going to give you an idea of like, okay, can they handle, some kind of interaction with another athlete pushing through the ground? If you start to see things down the chain, like at the ankle foot, start to collapse inward into, some kind of inversion. If you see something at the hip where they really, really externally rotate, it's like that may not be setting them up for success later on, or they may just not be ready to progress from there.
Okay.
How do you kind of feel about like just lowering the limb velocity in general in order to expose that and getting like a higher like essentially overcoming the inertia and the plane outputs in this of extreme fashion. So even though the total body isn't moving at the same velocity and the limbs move at a lower velocity, but you have to overcome a larger part of inertia and then you have higher ground reaction forces if you're doing like a heavy toe. Like I've seen experience I've had experience doing that and getting a lot of at least central nervous system stimulus to provide that like when we do work them back into original practice, we've overreached almost on like the central nervous system stimulus to where that won't happen. And then it's like, well, we've progressed the actual specific tissue resilience to be able to start to handle those outputs as you've either elongated it or lowered the actual external constraint to where that velocity speeds up. Where would you work that into the model that you currently have, mixing it with if you were to do so?
I think it would take the role of like a special strength exercise, right? Like if we look at, you mentioned in the last podcast, right? Sets and reps don't matter. And like that is very, I think in my opinion, that is a true point. So if that is the case, right, and we can train strength through a multitude of very, very different ways, like I think going to the Bondarchuk pyramid, looking of like what's the competition exercise, what's the step below SDE, SP, GPE, like where does that fit? Does that athlete need a special strength stimulus that's going to look more like sprinting? So like if we can identify, like I think it's very easy visually to see who's a good accelerator and who's not. So like if that athlete is somebody who's poor at like that first couple steps, like those first two steps, and they can't overcome their own inertia, that might be an athlete that really might benefit from that heavy toe. And so if that's the case, like plugging and chugging in that special strength exercise, I think works to that benefit, even if that limb velocity is slow and the speed is slow, like that might be what they need to then expose them to the right positions down the line. Because if they don't have that, they might just stay super, super backside the entire time because they don't have that initial starting position to even get frontside later down in the actual sprint itself.
So you'd almost work through it once you've like watched them move, almost in like essentially like a movement screening. I know we've talked about that before, Christian, but essentially that builds a decision tree for you of what part, what phase is it, the zero step, is it initial or early onset acceleration, is it late acceleration, is it the transition phase, is it the max velocity phase that they have problems with, and then that's where you start to like further break things down and say this is where we need to enter, this is where we need to bring in more dribbles because it's the upright mechanics that truly limit, it's the initials or the zero step that we call it, where they can't overcome inertia. That's where I'm going to start to attack those pieces. You're saying right now, right? And I'm being the devil's advocate here, is that there's no one size fits all approach, but the more knowledge you have over the basis of this, you can attack, like you had mentioned, like 12, 15 guys on the sideline in 12, 15 different ways to accomplish the same goal.
Pretty much. I think if you, especially within rehab, like the goal should be for that athlete to come back better than they were pre-injury, in my opinion, at least physically. Like we can talk about skill acquisition, but we don't really have too much of an influence on that outside the practice. So like
Mm-hmm.
our goal from a strength and conditioning standpoint, from a sports performance standpoint, and a sports medicine standpoint should be that athlete should be better physically, movement quality than they were prior to the injury so that they don't set themselves up for future injury. I mean, we all know the number one risk factor for future injury is current injury or previous injury. So I think looking at it that way of like, okay, that's the end goal. I think you do need to give a little bit more specialized stimulus to the athlete based off what their anatomy is, what the injury is. I don't think a general like bucket is bad. Like I think you can get good results and you'll probably like get your average athlete who's injured to progress back to the field well. But I think if you really want to dive deep and give the best possible service, you're probably going to go find that extra mile of like, hey, what does this athlete truly need? Like, let's go look at, can he stabilize on a wall? Is he able to hold these positions? Okay, he can't hold these positions. Why is that? Like diving really deep into the issue and looking at it, I think is a little bit more of that specific marker of like, okay, that could be the little small tweak that makes that athlete tick when it goes to, game time. So,
All right.
What about, you mentioned like stuff that you're seeing when you're looking at someone return to play. Are you doing this all in like real time? Do you use any like, all right, I'm gonna take a video, look at it in slow motion, motion capture, stuff like that? Or are you just like done it so many times, you know what to look for and can kind of see it the first time through with your raw eye?
I think unless you're Dan Pfaff, like nobody's coaching eye is really perfect. So I would say like I can pick up on a lot of things with the naked eye, but I think I'm always trying to film. I'll use like, especially if it's a guy that I'm working with on the sidelines, like I'm using like I think it's On Form is the app that I've been using. It's
Mm-hmm.
relatively cheap. I think I used it for free for like a month and then kind of paid for it, but it's been very helpful because you can plot the angles of the limbs. You can see just from a basis of like that kinematic look of like what does his sequence look like, and is there something wrong? You can
Cool.
also slow it down to the thousandth of a second instead of like the hundredth, so it can be really really slow, and you can really see the small fine tuned details. I think that's really good with like anterior and posterior views rather than, lateral. Because I think if you look from the backside and you really slow that down, you can see a lot, especially if you reverse the video of like what kind of looks off. Why is his hip a little bit more, angular than the other side? Why does he have, the ilium hip hiking on one side? Like, and now you can ask those questions of like, hey, why is that? And then go into, I mean, we're lucky enough here. We have so much technology. Like we have force plates, we have Nordboard, we have catapult. So I can go and like ask those questions and look through the data of like what's going on with this. Is there a hamstring deficit? Is there a shift on his force plate counter movement jump? And I can really like dive in and see. Okay, is there? Yes, there is. Okay, why? Now I see. Okay, he's a guy that's suffering from an ankle sprain. Okay, he has a shift away from his right leg. His hip is hiking when he's accelerating. Okay, he's compensating through that lateral sling. All right, let's give him this specific stimulus that might help fix that for the moment, and then we can drill it and try to get it to go away over time.
Greg, your PT is showing.
I don't have a DPT.
um,
That would be helpful when you're dealing with sports medicine professionals, though.
that is true, and that kind of begs the question, like, how there's 1,000 different certifications that you can get. That obviously there's the two big ones of the CSCS, the SCCC. I don't know what the CSCCA technically is called. But do you think that there's like a legitimacy to collecting these certifications? Obviously, it's like the certifications don't really matter to us. It's the knowledge that you acquire within those. But do you think that it provides that extra layer of like legitimacy to speaking to either a medical professional or speaking to some athletes where they view it so much more legitimate when you have those couple extra initials after your name?
That's a good question. This might be controversial, but I would say no. I think athletes care about how you can articulate information to them. Can you put it in a way that they can understand? Do you know what you're talking about? I think a lot of times we can easily fall into the trap of like, is our athlete, potentially like, oh, this athlete's like not this, like not that, like, oh, he doesn't get that. But like they pick up on like if you care or not, relatively easily. And like I think if you can show, hey, I mean I've had transparent conversations with guys where I have never dealt with their injury before. And I will go straight up to them and be like, hey, like I have never dealt with, like, for example, before I got this job, I didn't ever have to deal with a rotator cuff tear. I'd only dealt with labral repairs and fracture repairs of like the collarbone or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I straight up went up and told him, I was like, I've never dealt with your injury before, but I promise you, I'm going to go and look and try to find out as much information as possible so I can give you the best possible care. And I think whether that's an AT, a PT, a strength coach, like I think it's the transparency of like, hey, can you have that open conversation? Don't pretend you're an expert if you're not an expert. And can you provide that athlete with the confidence of like, hey, I'm going to do the best job that I can to make sure you and I are together on this journey. I think that's like the biggest aspect of it. Do I think have to be dialed in on your continuing education? Like that has to be a priority. I think we've talked about this before, but like I have this imposter syndrome of like getting a full-time job out of an internship where I feel like I have ground to make up. And so I spend an exorbitant amount of money on just trying to take courses, read books, see everything I could find to bridge that gap between me and somebody who's been in this field for 10 plus years. And if I'm
So
not doing that, I feel like I'm doing my athletes a disservice. So like my whole goal is I want to be as smart as possible so I can provide the best possible thing for you as an athlete.
So when you're kind of looking at continuing education, like where do you typically go? Like as a coach, like we both know that you're a busy guy. When you call me, you're calling me at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. Your day is spent doing stuff for your job. Like where are you looking for and how do you kind of go about your continuing education process to make sure that A, it gets done, B, you're not necessarily wasting your time on education. And I say wasting your time is there's some shit out there that just frankly is not worth the money that sometimes you pay for it. It's just rehashing the same old foundational level knowledge over and over again that you would have gotten as you were a GA or an intern, and it's going to be packaged as if it's this next level thing. What is it like? Where do you go to find out the best information to make sure that it's A, consistent, B, it's new stuff, and C, it's not going to be a time sink?
Number one, when I was an intern at Elon, Jordan Newsoma sent his book list, and then he posted it on social media like a year ago. And I think I've read like 90% of those books on that list because like I view him in such a high regard that I was like, okay, if he thinks these books and he ranked them, and he was like, if he thinks these books are good, I should probably read these. So I am lucky to have some great mentors like you, TK, Gabe, and I'll just ask like, okay, what books are you guys reading? Okay, is this worthwhile? I also will go and look at like coaches in the field that I want to be like, or that I really respect their opinions of, and I look at what they're reading. Paul Jackson posts his book of the month all the time. I'll get. I remember Stephanie Mock posted her book list on her Instagram, and I've like gone through and looked at those. So I'll look at like what other coaches are reading, and then Jason Weber and I had a conversation a year ago. TK and I set us up with that one, and he kind of put me towards the make sure you have encountered all of the basics. So that's all your Russian literature, your Zasyorskis, your Bondarchuks, your Tudor Bompas. Like, make sure you've read all of that because they have done everything probably that we've seen on social media for the last 2 years. They've done it all in the 1960s with research that validates it. So, like, I think the classics have been a great underpinning of like my model. And then just reaching out to other coaches about what books to read. And then the courses I've taken, I mean, the Fast to Fit course with Alan Murdoch, I mean, he's an elite professional within the rehab space. Like, that was something that boosted my knowledge base a lot. I mean, I went to the CVASP seminar with you as well, and listening to Charlie Weingroff talk was like listening to, you know, a ninja on stage. Like, he just has so much knowledge from his like years of experience that like he can articulate extremely complex topics in simple language. And I think that's like a key of like what makes somebody really, really knowledgeable. Like, I talk very complex a lot of the time, but like there's people that know the complex things that I want to know, and they can put it in language that like a 10-year-old can understand. And I'm like, I want to be like you. So I'll go and look at what they're doing.
So, you've kind of talked about not only your continuing education, but like the big influences on you as a coach. If you're going to boil it down and say, hey, if I'm going to tell you to go look for three coaches that you should learn from, what would be the three coaches that you would want one of your interns that you have? Who would you send them to go learn from?
Send them to?
Either send them to, or even just get like, I guess like when I say send them to, I would say like refer, like go look at his stuff, go read this, go watch what they do. If you're even just gonna follow on social media, like whatever it is, like what direction I should say would you point that intern or the young coach who's coming up to talk to you? What's the direction that you would point them in three different coaches?
That's really tough. Um, I think number one would be Dan Pfaff. I think he's just on another level when it comes to understanding the human body and sprinting.
And how
So
he
I'd say he's
moves?
number one. If you can't see him, Jonas Dodu. Um, I think TK, Terrence Kennel. I've learned so much from him, and like I remember even when I first got into like learning about performance, he was like one of the first people I encountered that really understood the things that I wanted to know about, you know, practice models, integration of training, skill acquisition, and just organizing training. And you know, I reached out to him, and now we're friends. So it's like I'd say he's number two, and then number three. Um, that's tough. Tim Karen is somebody that pops to mind, and I think because he is extremely detail oriented in how he structures progressions, regressions, and stuff like that. And his learning resources too, I think, are very good. The Poliquin influences, we could debate whether or not Poliquin influences one thing or the other, but I think he's somebody who has a really, really good integration of performance at the highest levels of football. So if
Mhm.
I'm dealing with a football answer, those would be the three.
I guess we've talked a lot about all the good things, the good influences, the opportunities that you've had, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on and on and on about the good stuff. Unfortunately, people don't give a shit about the good stuff. They want to know the bad stuff. They want to know the tea. Like, I want to start this piece of like, what's the toughest hurdle that you've had as a coach? Like, you have a young career, right? We'll be honest here. Like, you're 3-4 years into the industry in total, including all the things you've done from internships from start to finish. Like, what's the toughest hurdle that you've had when considering that?
Not trying to put like the cart before the horse. I think everybody wants to be at like a big logo or a big school or whatever it might be, right? You want to work with the elite of the elite and understand like, yeah, you're 3 years into your career. Like, there's guys who are at the Power Five level, yes, that have been in the field for 2 or 3 years and they just knew the right people that got them there. But there's also like the majority of the coaches that have been coaching for 10, 12, 15 years and are just now getting their first crack at the big time. And they're probably really freaking good coaches. So it's like, I think not trying to rush towards the destination and kind of like sit where you're at, be really good where you're at has been like the biggest, I guess.
Hurdle?
Yeah. Like
That one?
because I want to be really, really good. And like, I want to do it at a high level. And I think like, that's like a hard, like thing to pass in your mind of like not wanting to just like jump to the next spot. Like you want to be good where you're at. And so I think that's like a hurdle. Relationships with sport coaches was something I was completely unprepared for, I think, when I came to a full-time position. I think like I had a good understanding of people and like obviously playing, at Division I football, like you do see within the recruiting process, like just how coaches interact with athletes, but I never saw strength coach interactions at that detailed level. So I think, I'll put a failure in here, but like with my softball staff, I definitely came in to Towson really, really hard off the bat of like I wanted to do things like this way, this way, this way, because I thought that was like the right thing to do and like be confident in what you're saying. And I think that certainly rubbed people the wrong way because I just I wanted to do something. I didn't have that ability to be like, okay, let's find that like, what do you want, coach? Like, how can I make this work for you? What is your biggest worry about your team? I think those are all things that like I was not prepared for that. So I think that was a hurdle I had to jump over because I definitely came in too harsh. And I was like, okay, now I don't have that initial trust right off the bat. Now it's a uphill battle to build it. And so like trying to find those things is like definitely a challenge, I think.
Yeah, you kind of felt like you like walked in and with a shovel and just dug yourself a hole and said, "How do I get out now?"
Yeah, and I think that staff really liked um, they really liked their strength coach before me. And I think when you walk into a situation like that, and I've heard a couple people say it now, so like obviously at my next job, that's exactly what I plan to do. But it's like make sure you have an understanding of the good things that the person did before you, so that you aren't just coming in like you need to set your standards. Obviously, like set your standards with the athletes, set your lines of communication, set your expectations, but don't just jump in and be like, hey, this is my way, like this is how I do things. Like you need to be like sitting back and seeing what do they already have that works, how can I take that, and then over time adjust with the relationship.
And instead of like kind of opening up a fire hose and being like, "Hey, drink,"
Yeah.
you come in blasting like that. Essentially, like no, I mean, but for lack of a better term, like you come in blasting like that, and no matter who it is, everybody in the entire world is going to immediately like take a step back and get on defensive and immediately like this guy, guy, girl, whatever. I don't give a shit, but they're going to be like, something's wrong. I don't like it. I'm completely apprehensive to everything that they're going to say versus being like, all right, there's like a certain level, like this might be a professional that takes himself very seriously. Whereas if you came into the situation, it's like, hey, let's have a conversation. What are you looking for? Like, as a sport coach, like what kind of, essentially, like you can even ask, like, what kind of system do you run? What are like, because a spread football team, if we're looking at football terms here, a spread football team is going to be very different than a triple option, run. It's just the way it is. An air raid offense is going to be completely different from a pro I form, just from the fact of like one might need a lot stronger linemen, one might need faster linemen in skilled positions, be working in space versus being able to just absolutely punish the fucking people across from them 4 yards over and over and over again.
Yeah.
One might need more conditioning, right? So like understanding, or at least trying to understand like what they do and how they operate. Is this softball team, if we're talking about them for an example, are they just worried about how many home runs we can get? Because then you might just be more strength oriented and you want to put mass on them and make everybody a big hitter. Or are they more of, we need to get on base? That's number one. Well, can we at least hit a single or a double? And then do we have enough speed to carry over? Right? That kind of stuff will kind of play different roles based off of that conversation. And even then, it allows you to kind of play the game of, well, at least they know that I have their best interest at heart. They're going to probably give me some leeway to go about that however I see fit. Because if I can communicate effectively how I'm going to get there, we're probably in the clear. And I think that's a hard thing. I think for every young coach coming into the industry, whether it be a part-time role, a GA, or their first full-time role, is having so many ideas and being so eager. You almost come off as if you're going to try and change the game because you just want to be able to show that you actually have a skill set and you're not just another nitwit that's coming in here to just be there and quote unquote like be a weights guy.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just it's an ignorance to the industry and like an over eagerness to try and show value that it comes off and it ends up coming off in a bad way versus being able to just speak slower, take a step back. I think we've all made this mistake, whether from one time or another. It's just, did it backfire as much as it did for some people, or was it overlooked? Um, but I think that's a great hurdle, and I think it's a great way to kind of recognize like a shortcoming of yourself to be able to grow from it for either this role, the next coach you deal with, whoever it might be, or the next role itself. Um, I think a lot of people need to hear that because we all have this expectation when we first come into the industry of, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to get a job, and they're going to let me do what I want to do because that's how it works. Like, it's a harsh fucking truth, but it's not the case. You
Good
can think
luck.
whatever you want. Yeah,
Yeah.
good luck, have fun, buckle up, buddy. Welcome to hell. Um, it's just, that's not how it works. And I think that's a good thing for people to hear. Now, in regarding to that, kind of staying on a more negative note, like if you had to pick like a problem in the industry, we've talked about this with every single guest we have. You know, some people have said money, some people have said like the hours that you work. I think TK had a really good one, is like a lot of people are too reliant on technology and data and put that before the training that actually attributes to the data that you collect with the technology. Like, where do you find the largest problem in the industry, even if it is something that people haven't thought about?
I think, oh, that is a good one. Um,
Damn straight's a good one.
I was like, TK's answer would be like where I would go with that one.
Don't cop out.
Oh, no, I won't. I think the biggest thing I see, like at least now compared to when I was like an intern, probably like the lack of consideration of like the entire like system of like everything hormonal, metabolic, cardiopulmonary, like what is like the total human body, and like why do we always like resort to like, oh, we have to do something evidence based, like the evidence is so far behind that like you can use things that are outside of like repeat 110s in the literature for like cardiovascular like benefit. You can use things outside of a 1 mile run test. Like there are so many other things. Like just revert back to the principles. Like I think Fergus Connolly's book Game Changer does a really good job. But like if you aren't taking into account the entire human system, like something is not recovered somewhere. And like I don't think like people like to look that deep into it because it's hard. It's really really hard. It's hard to understand, and you have to come to like grips with the fact that like you really don't know if you're doing a good job or not. I think a lot of people tend to get too caught on like, hey, I do my job well, like I get results, and it's like, hey, like you might get results, but you don't know why you're getting the results. Like you might go to a new place and like try to do the same thing, and you're not actually getting the results you want anymore. And it's like you don't know why. You just were like, oh, that worked. So I think not looking deep enough into the problem is something that lacks.
I think you make a good point. Like, and this is probably a bad way to position this thought, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's not enough neuroticism within this field. And I'll say that in the aspect of a lot of people, like you said, take the results at surface level and they're like, that's cool. I can go home. I can live with that. They got better. I did my job. Versus being a little bit more neurotic about why. And it's like, is it, and having that like self doubt or the imposter syndrome of, is it because of me or is it because we have, we've talked about this 1,000 times on the podcast. Are they genetic freaks and they're just going, or are they 18 years old and they can recover from anything? Or is, at some levels, is our sports nutritionist so dialed that their road to recovery is expedited from that process? Are our ATs working around the clock to make sure that they're always healthy and prepared, and we don't have to do as much, necessarily prehab work or even just auxiliary work because they're getting that taken care of all the time over there? From like an output perspective, are they super fast because of what we do, or is the sport coach in some way, shape, or form expediting that process from the field work that they do? Same thing with like their cardiovascular system. All of this comes together, like you said, in like that total system, and it's like you play one small role. We might touch 1,000 different things, but are we a big enough emphasis in one way or the other on any of those pieces to where we truly influence the outputs that come from the work that's being attributed from either our end or someone else's? I think it's a great point. Christian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's not, this field isn't like most jobs where you can just not think about work after you're out of work, to me. Like if you want to like truly be like good at it. And I think most people that are still in the field after a few years like are in it because they still want to, because you can obviously go do something else for probably more money and work less hours. Um, it's got to be a balance between always looking for what you're missing, because you're always going to be missing something. And obviously the human body is super complex, and anytime you're dealing with people in general, that throws a wrench into things. Always be looking for that, but also you can kind of drive yourself insane if you don't have, I don't want to say like being satisfied, but you can almost, if they're just saying like if you're looking for problems, you'll find one. Like you're probably always going to be able to find something that you're missing. And sometimes you could be correcting something, and sometimes maybe things are going well and you just think that you need to keep changing things. So, and I think that's tough. I don't even know if I do. I definitely don't know if I do a good job at that. But I think to err on the side of always questioning like what you're missing, especially like we're all like pretty young. Like I definitely don't know. I mean, we all know closer to nothing than we do to everything. That's for sure. So,
I barely know my ass from a hole in the ground.
100%.
I also think Kier said best too. It's like any idiot can get another idiot tired.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Facts.
it really is like strength and conditioning as a whole. Like if you only view things through the lens of like strength or like neural or like say you're a big like hypertrophy guy and you look at everything through the hormones and nutrition, it's like are you missing something else? Like I think that aspect leads to a misrepresentation of like the value that we can actually have. Like I think if you were to ask 1,000 strength coaches, like what's your value, you're gonna get like 5% with a ton of different answers, and then 95% are gonna be like, I just make people stronger, or they're not gonna have an answer.
Get them
And I
strong,
think like
baby.
if you were to get if you were to get asked the question by like a head coach in an interview, hey, what value do you bring to like us winning games? Can you quantify how many games you would win us if you were here as a strength coach for us? It's like I don't think anybody would really that many people would have an answer to that of like, hey, I provide this. And I think Anthony Cockrell, like I like his training to a degree, but he really puts it in his little like program. I'm gonna make you jump higher for volleyball. And he's like, that is my value. Like, you are going to jump higher, and that's the number one thing for me physically that's going to make you better at volleyball from a physical standpoint. And so that's his value. And he's going to get paid money to do it. And so if you don't have that ability to like say your value and you can't dive into the problem deep enough to, especially within a multivariate team sport like a football, soccer, you're gonna struggle, I think, to hold longevity at the highest level because like something could go wrong, and if you don't look into it, like you're not providing value.
Yeah, and I think that I listened to a really good. It was a podcast with Cam Joss. I think it was the Move the Needle podcast, and he had a really good quote about like part of what makes me like a good coach is like knowing how little my job matters. And like it sounds a little bit like pessimistic, but like knowing that what you can and can't influence. Like you said, like we're probably not going to have a huge role in influencing skill acquisition unless you're in like more of like a hybrid role, which you're starting to see a little bit more of nowadays. So maybe that is more true for you. But knowing what you can influence and dialing in on that, and then to bring it back to your point about, we've had conversations between me and you of like kind of that shift from you wanting to be at a certain job and maybe putting the cart before the horse a little bit, and that shift in mindset of from that to, okay, that's not a great goal. The better goal is, let me be the best practitioner I possibly be. Like, let me be a master of my craft. Like, that's probably going to get you that position in the end anyway, or closer to it than just, okay, how can I get the next job? How can I get the next job? How can I cheat the system to finesse my way to P5 or the professional level? So I don't know. You have to, especially like I said, the pay is getting better, I think, in the industry, but it's not like you couldn't go somewhere else and make more money for less time. You got to really be willing to like want to hone your craft. And like that's why one of my favorite books is Mastery by Robert Greene. It just talks about like how people are like honing their craft and like addressing it more as like not how can you like finesse to the next job, but how can you actually truly understand how to do your job well, and like reiterating that over time.
I think too, like if you bring that to a strength and conditioning perspective, it's like where we live now in this, it's just, I guess like the higher levels are getting more and more into sports science and stuff, and you're expected to have like objective metrics on force plates and all this other stuff. And it's like I can still evaluate my program off of a mid thigh pull and a counter movement jump. But like if I'm solely programming to improve a mid thigh pull and a counter movement jump, I'm not training my athlete for the game anymore. I'm training them for the test. And it's like if I use the principles, as you said, like you have to dive into that nitty gritty and be really, really good at your job as a practitioner. Like you're not going to necessarily know what makes somebody the best athlete on the field. But like if I try to write a program that's going to focus on making my athletes the best that they can be, and I follow everything and I test it, then I kind of have an idea of if my program's working for the adaptations that I want or not. I don't need to program for the test, but if I'm programming for the game, then I have a good idea of like, okay, I gave you X stimulus that we needed at this phase in our progression. It was a multi-planar movement. We did some kind of jump, whatever. In our power phase, we progressed to this. And then in our strength phase, we had a strength improvement. And in our power phase, we had a counter movement jump increase with rate of force development in the braking phase and propulsive net impulse. All right, boom. Now I know my sport specific training, and I put that in quotes because it's still very, very general, is at least getting the outputs that I want it to have. So I know it's working, but in my principles, it's focused around making them a better athlete on the field, not making them better at counter movement jumping.
Mm-hmm. And I think that brings up a good point on like KPIs. Everyone says like keep it simple, have like 3 to 4, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, whatever it is. Where you've seen someone go so far. Like there's also like the West Side method or kind of like the Tony Holler method where there's so many that it's like you PR all the time. So it's great for the athletes like psyche just to make sure that they're always improving. But it's like, yeah, but we don't test this, before and after or in between each cycles. It's like we test that once a year. So by the time we come around to it, like of course you would probably have gotten better because we've moved the needle a ton over that period of time. Where it's like if you have like 9 to 10, you know, this is just my opinion, and opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. You don't need to hear everybody's though. But 9 to 10, cycle them in like every other cycle, or you have 2 to 3. Maybe you test like an RSI one day. Maybe you test a counter movement jump one day. Maybe you test a mid thigh pull. You can integrate the actual testing procedures into the cards themselves versus setting aside full days. It's the same thing as like a max strength testing day or a 1 rep max day. You can integrate that into your actual training and just see if like things have progressed enough on the trend, right? It's not going to truly be one linear shot. You're going to have your ebb and flow, but if the trend lines of at least most of your KPIs, hopefully they're related to the sport, are trending while you still have the overall thought process in mind of the sport is the most predominant KPI, whether that be wins and losses, or if you're in a stopwatch sport, obviously, then your events make it super easy of like, are we getting better there? That's your most important KPI. And then all the other stuff is supporting roles towards that. Like then it becomes less of I'm training to get better at these tests and a little bit more so on those tests are going to be guiding me on if I essentially kind of fuck them up or like are we kind of improving in the general direction that we want to, because a lot of this is a guessing game. you know Brett Bartholomew had a great thing of like it's an art guided by science, right? So what we're doing is trying to just guide the decision making process by the scientific testing that we do, quote unquote scientific testing, whether it be on a jump mat, a force plate, timing gates, whatever it is. Those are supposed to be helping us, kind of stay within our boundaries as we try to go forward. Versus like, hey, we see that, 3 or 4 of these have pushed us way under. We may have, done a no-no and gone way off the rails here, or this particular piece of the program, whether it's phase potentiation, whether you're doing a linear progression, whatever it is, dramatically has shown that this is not the way to do it right now. Those should help you push yourself in the general direction for preparing for the sport versus, like you had said, Greg, I want to train that we have higher force output on a mid thigh pull. We make the joke that there's no squat rack on the 50-yard line. There's also no force plates, right? So if the whole basis of your training is I'm going to make them a better counter movement jumper and a better mid thigh puller, will be good. It's like, well, you can probably produce a lot of force. It doesn't necessarily you're going to be able to redirect and do that very fastly. You might not necessarily be able to perceive the environment and make a game time decision. You might not be able to have co-contractions in the muscular tissue to make sure that you can repeat that action over and over again. That might just be a singular output. All these different things. Can you recover enough from the cardiovascular system to be able to come back in and do that again? All these things come together in the big buzzword time. It's buzzword Brian in a holistic system to come through and say all of these pieces together form one athlete and one organism that goes to the team to produce more wins, especially at the collegiate level. I don't care what anyone says, wins are important. If you can't progress in that general direction and you become fixated on improving a KPI or 2 specific ones, you're in trouble.
And I think if you look at why that KPI didn't go up with your sport specific training, that's a question you can now go look at your holistic training cycle and see why that is, because it might not be what you did. It might be that they had exams the week right before you did your final test and you saw a dip, or they had, potentially some kind of event that happened outside of that. And it's like when we're dealing with like a sample of n equals ones, right? And it's like I think sometimes we get so caught up in, oh, we want to improve the average, but like every athlete is its own individual. And like evaluating, like this leads into a whole different rant, but like evaluating research, for example, like the Matt Ray study that everybody in track and field wants to cite about getting guys faster, right? Quarter squat, half squat, back squat. Like the first 8 weeks of that study, they didn't see a significant change in any of those on sprint speed or jump height. But they had to continue the study for 8 more weeks of quarter squatting, half squatting, and back squatting before they saw that actual influence of the quarter squat on sprint speed. And it's like, that's 16 weeks of training. When do we ever really get that within a collegiate setting outside of like a P5 level?
Especially uninterrupted.
Uninterrupted.
And at that point too, like you have to look at the context of the situation. Like if you look at like more research is needed in that implications kind of section of how trained were the individuals, how, X, Y, Z, all these other things, etc. It's like for the most part, they're probably beginning level or introductory level or novice. Getting stronger is probably going to get them there. And at that point, they probably needed 16 weeks of true acclimation or accumulation over that period in order to have something actualized.
And it's also like, what was the sprint training going on? We all know what a 16-week cycle of football training looks like. You're probably very, very short at the first 8 weeks, and you're building to longer sprints by the end of it. So if that's the case, when was that first 8 weeks? Was that, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but like say they were doing, fourth quarter agility drills because, Nick Saban, it's like, all right, now your team is worn down, beat up. Yeah, nobody might have a significant speed change, but you continue it now for 8 weeks. Now we're in summer. Now guys are rested. They don't have classes. It's like, now you see the change. It's like, all right, those are questions like we should be asking about our programming. Like that's not to shit on his study at all. Like I think it's still valuable, but like you got to ask those questions. And like Alex brought it up, Alex Brodesky, like I was listening to that one the other day, and like a 1 to 2% change in track and field is the difference between winning 100-meter at the Olympics and not qualifying for NCAA nationals at this point in time. Like that small of a difference. So if we're looking at like, because some even NCAA nationals ran 9.75 the other day.
Guy's insane. It was 2.1 wind aided, but I'm gonna be honest with you.
That's still nuts.
Take it down to one. When you take it down to 1.9, he runs 9.77. I think we can just declare him as a beast.
Yeah, but it's like that small of a change. Like when we deal with so many variables, like that is important. So like knowing where I can get those small little 1 to 2% changes, I think is valuable. If you aren't diving into your programming, and then also diving into how you coach it, I think session organization and how many eyes you have on an athlete matters, because I forgot who the quote is, but like it's not the program, but it's how you coach it. Like the intent that the athlete puts it in sometimes might be the thing. Yeah,
that's an Elon internship
that you might put into
for me.
It is more important.
Yeah.
So, if you're not diving into every aspect, session organization, why, like, am I having the same set of eyes on the same groups? Are they hearing the same coaching cues? Nick Winkelman's book, Language of Coaching, like external coaching or external cueing versus internal cueing. Are you giving the same cues? Are you letting them perform the rep? All of that matters. So if you're not diving into that as well, like you're missing the mark on potentially those 1 to 2 extra little percentage points that might make a difference.
I couldn't agree more personally. I agree. Like I said, I agree with you. And I think it does also bode into like field sports too. Like if we can get a 1 to 2% change within a field sport athlete, that could be the difference of making someone miss as a midfielder in a game of soccer or in a game of lacrosse, or coming through. And let's look at like 1 to 2% change in the variance of when someone swings a bat at a baseball. Like that could mean the difference between making beautiful contact and piping that 450 yards or 450 feet and just crushing it out of the park, or it's now a line drive straight at a center fielder. Like those small changes, especially as those levels get more and more elite, you're fighting, I make the quote of like, we're fighting for milliseconds here, and that's in the sport of track and field, but like, it's the same thing across the board, whether you're not fighting for milliseconds, but your margins are so much smaller for success because of the law of diminishing gains that it's like, we have to fight for every little bit of inch or whatever you want to call it to make sure that we can make an improvement, because we're past the point of big chunk gains and taking large bites out of this stuff, that we're just like, if I can do 8 things as best as we can, we might get a small incremental increase in our outputs or whatever it is to make sure that we can move that needle that little bit. And at the end of the day, like especially at the higher levels, that's what you're fighting for. You have to be more dialed. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times it gets messy because in some professional organizations or at the top level stuff, these kids have, outside trainers. They're going to the local park with their uncle to make sure that they can get their footwork in, whatever, that everyone wants to take credit for a piece. But it's like, you have to be, as like the sports performance coach, when that stuff happens, you become more of like a stress manager and making sure that, unfortunately, you probably have to dial back your stuff because they're not going to tell their private trainer that they pay $450 a week to, that, because they think in their mind, that's what's making me great. You now have to mitigate the risk associated with that. You have to mitigate the risk of all the other external constraints that come into this and say, this has to move towards the common goal, because unfortunately, I'm the only one whose paycheck and it depends on this. And if we don't do well, they're going to look to me. They're not going to look and tell them, hey, you got to cut the extra guy out, because that's your job.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, you make a great point though, like coming back to this and not rambling too much, but getting that 1 to 2% increase means a lot, whether it be in the NCAA versus a Olympic, gold medal, or even just at our level in mid majors of making someone progress enough to beat out the competition. It's not an even playing field as much as we want to say it is. It's not. So we have to be able to fight that battle. Even in Christian's realm of, it's more foundational level athletes at the academy, but it's like these guys some of them are paid as much as $1 million per year as a signing bonus. You need them to go up to the big leagues. You need to make at least the 1 to 2% change, so that way they can go at the very least they can move up to high A or low A, and then make more progressions there to make it up to the show. That stuff matters. There's no gain that is so small that it's insignificant. A gain is a gain. You have to get there. And it's our job to find the ways to get there, whether it be nutrition, hormonal, strength, speed, aerobic capacity, depending on the sport, whatever it is. And as long as it supports the common goal of success in the sport, you have to get that and see if we can contribute other factors to push that needle forward.
Well said.
Thank you. That's my caffeine and nicotine induced rant for the day. I'm usually good for one of those a podcast. I blacked out. What happened?
It's a classic Brian Chakosky. Reminds me of the landmine press. The landmine press rant.
You still do standing landmines, or what's the deal with that?
No, I was just arguing with you for the whole standpoint.
Anyone in that what was it 2023 internship class will know what we're talking about. But
legendary,
a full hour induced screaming match over how stupid it is to do a standing landmine press.
Yep. Glad I got to witness.
But so many people just don't want to have those conversations.
No, it's like you're right though. Like they don't, because I mean
they don't want to feel stupid.
TK brought this up too. Is like, argue with your mentors instead of putting them on a pedestal. Like, argue with them. You might have not fully believed in your argument, but you were willing to die on the hill to make me think, and that's a good thing, right? And I don't think enough people are comfortable in the situation, or at least knowledgeable or confident in their own knowledge to be able to do that. And some people are far too confident. Don't get me wrong. There's some dumbasses out there, and that's the Dunning-Kruger effect in place. But like, have those arguments, test each other, like especially in like a good environment to where you guys can have a full on, maybe not a screaming match like we had, but like have a good argument on why you do or don't support something, and then be done with it, and then just be like, hey man, let's go get some food, let's go get a beer, let's move on. Like, because it wasn't about you or me when we had that argument discussion. It was, let's fight on principles, and it's almost like, I don't know if I'm sharp enough right now. Let's see if we can like push the boundary and like let's argue a little bit. I want to see if I still got it. You know,
But it's
it's
also
a
good
good
too
thing.
because like I can't tell you how many like I come from both my parents are teachers at the college level and they're both math professors. So like, whatever that comes with. But like I learn by teaching and I learn by talking things like with other people. And I think whether it's arguing, whether it's a discussion, it doesn't really matter. I think I will never view somebody's viewpoint like to their face as disrespectful or whatever. Like it's always like I want to talk to you because I'm genuinely interested in what you have to say. I may not agree with it, and we can go back and forth about why you agree, why you don't, like why I don't agree, why you like something, why I don't like something. But like I'll walk away from that conversation and I will have learned something. And I'll have learned
Yeah.
something that might change my mind about what I do. I mean, I had a conversation with my boss here, who's a Cal Dietz. He interned with Cal Dietz. He's a triphasic guy. I've talked to him about triphasic before, things I don't like, things I do like, whatever. We've talked about it. We've disagreed on different aspects. I walked away from that conversation, and I guarantee I added triphasic based principles into my next program because I was like, you made some really good points. Like I really like how you view that. Same with Gary Gray and the whole applied functional science stuff. Like at first, I was a non-believer, had some debates back and forth about why I don't think it's valuable, why I do, and now I incorporate AFS stuff within my programming because I'm like, hey, there is some value here. Like I see that viewpoint, and I wouldn't have learned that. And I would have been stuck in my ways if I never had those conversations.
Sorry, I'm writing down something. There we go. Christian, you got anything? Or should we
Yeah, I got
maybe
one question that I want to ask to you because I know we could roll into a couple things here, but I know we've talked about this like just me and you. What are a couple pieces? Let's go like three pieces of equipment, like gym equipment, that you think are underrated for a team setting, or overrated. You can go either way, but I feel like the underrated, you're gonna have some good picks here.
Underrated gym equipment?
Yeah,
Underrated or like undervalued?
either
either
one.
either or.
They can mean the same
Um,
thing right now.
it's a great question.
Hell yeah, it is. Go Christian.
I think undervalued. I think a reverse hyper is one that I would say that I think is really undervalued. Um, I don't think there's many ways to train the hamstring in the weight room that's super dynamic like that. If you do it like single leg, double leg, you can train the low back and everything in the whole posterior chain that way. So I think that's one that I think is a big bang for your buck. Now it's one movement, but like you can definitely vary it. You can change your foot position, your angles and stuff. I think that's one.
You can you can use it for
Um,
rows too.
you can use it for rows. You can use it for extra rotation of the shoulder and stuff. But um, I think
Y'all ever
that's
done
one.
back extensions while holding on to the hyper arm?
Love that.
I'm a fan of that.
Um, oh, underrated piece of gym. It can be any gym equipment.
Any
Anything.
gym equipment.
Pendulum squat. Pendulum squat.
I'm gonna fully agree with that one.
Yeah,
Like
I'm
I
all
want
for
one
the
so bad,
machines.
dude.
This guy's a
God,
machine lover.
I love machines.
yeah.
A
Yeah,
Like
the
plate loaded pendulum squat with a deep range
nothing
of
like it.
motion.
yes,
Nothing like it.
Atlantis.
Um, yeah. They make one. Doesn't Nautilus make one as well, or something like that?
Nautilus does
Yep,
make one, yeah,
Yeah.
but the Atlantis is like
The Atlantis
that's
one
like
is
the
the
pinnacle
OG.
piece.
I've never used it, but I've heard it's very nice.
Um,
So smooth.
wow. Okay. One more piece of equipment. That's wonderful. I'm gonna go see the calf. I'm gonna go
Like a
see a
seated
calf
calf race
race
machine.
because I think it's within the team setting at least. Like I think programming direct soleus work is a real challenge with time frames that if you don't have an easy way to load it, like it's going to take for your average like football guy, like I could load up 405 on a soleus like seated calf and like that takes so much time. You have to have two guys who lift the bar up to help you. Like, I think that's a really undervalued part. I mean, if we look at sprint gate, it's like the soleus is active like up to 11 times body weight at different points during stance. So it's like, all right, how can I give this stimulus? Because like that might be, if we really dumb it down to things we can impact the most, like ankle stiffness could be one of the weight room pieces that influences speed probably the most out of what we do with like our level of athletes in terms of like biggest bang for your buck. Like you're going to spend like 5 minutes and you might actually get some relatively good influence on the field.
I feel the same way about like a hip thrust machine, like where you can act like the long pinned hip thrust machine,
Yeah.
when you can just you get in, you strap over the like the seatbelt kind of deal, and then you can hop right in. It's the same setup. Like you probably look like, especially with like football guys, if you want some significant impact, you've got to be 400, 500 plus, even just to work it. But again, two guys get underneath the barbell, prop the bench up, like when you can just strap in and go, you know, it's the same situation. Like those machines just create a quality of life where you can just integrate that into your programming without feeling like you have to set aside 15, 20 minutes for a lift.
Oh, I got one overrated for you, Christian. It's gonna Randy Huntington will never like me, but the Kaiser cable machine I think is extraordinarily overrated.
Kaiser
I
cable.
agree. I kind of agree with the Kaiser runner being overrated. I think it's a sick piece of equipment, but I'll say it's overrated simply because of this. You really can only do 1 to 2 movements on the damn thing. It's super expensive. It has a very large footprint, and if you want to use it in a team setting, you're probably going to get like 6 of them. So like it's like getting, essentially a Proteus at that point where they cost so much, they take up such a large foot space, and it's like you can only do a couple things on it.
Yeah.
When you could really just go outside and really sprint or like load up a sled and accomplish very similar, even if it's not the exact same stimulus, a very similar stimulus. Whereas like Kaiser cable, you can get that with a pin loaded machine, for lack of a better term. Is it going to be as consistent resistance? Probably not, but in a lot of rotational movements, you might not necessarily want always to be consistent on that tension, or you can do enough to get by.
I think that's the thing I don't like is the consistent tension because it doesn't match the resistance factors. Even within rotational sports, in my opinion, like if you're looking at baseball or softball or whatever or golf, it's like when you make contact with the ball, there is an impulse there. Like when you make
Mm-hmm.
a strong impulse. So like if you're training with a device that allows you to rotate, but it doesn't ever apply either accommodating resistance or a change in resistance at all, where there's like a catch. Like I think that within rotation, like maybe it serves a role in like a GPP, but certainly not from a move the needle within bat speed or ball exit velocity. I just don't see that as a true needle mover. I think it's very general, and I don't
Yeah.
see the bang in the buck of paying what, like 3-4 grand for a Kaiser cable when you could just get a regular
No, we
cable
losing
row
Grant.
machine.
That boy's frozen.
I just see his. There he
Oh,
is.
Am I still
He's
frozen?
back.
Yeah.
Nope,
now
we're
you're
good.
good now. Yeah, for me, I feel like the underrated for me, I'd probably go Smith machine for one of them. I feel like
We
you can
talked
do a
about that one.
lot. Yeah, we talked about that one. I think you can do a lot on a Smith and like, um, what else?
The the non bilateral leg press, where you can isolate one side or the other,
Oh yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
completely underrated, especially when
Yeah.
you look about rehab or like a regression for an athlete.
Yeah. I think to build off that, like a 2-in-1 leg extension seated leg curl. Give me that all day. And as well as a
I love it.
assisted dip / pull up. Um, love
Oh,
that for like rehab too, like assisted pull up / dip. Um, yeah.
that's a good one. I had
Big
one
fan.
more that I thought that was like I can't. It flipped off my head. Ski erg underrated. Love it.
Ski
Love a
erg is
good ski
very
erg.
underrated.
Yep.
I think especially in like the sports performance realm, I think, someone, if they can't use any lower extremity, just being able to get aerobic conditioning. Same thing as like an echo bike, you can do it, but it's a lot more difficult and you're going to spike a heart rate and get into zone 4 immediately. But like you can just get on that thing and start getting to work and you don't have to put any impacts or pressure. I will say a very underrated piece of equipment, not the Alter G, but we've got 2 of these at Elon now. Shout out Mark Rinker, our distance coach, for bringing these into Elon. But the Lightspeed, it's a frame with band suspension that costs a fraction of what an Alter G is. Still get the weight reduction on a treadmill. But the really thing that's underrated about it, A, it's smaller. B, the way the bands are set up to reduce the weight for the impact, it doesn't mess up the gait for the athlete like an Alter G does. Their running mechanics are not interfered with on a Lightspeed, which this is not a sponsored ad here. If they want to sponsor it, and I'll just start pumping it to all 100 subscribers, like give me the money. But I love that thing. I don't personally use it, but I've seen it in action. It is like, if you want something that you can afford to get 2 of them for the price still of a fraction of a Lightspeed and progress athletes back into like at least tempo running with reduced impact, or if you're just getting extra cardiovascular activity, those things are unreal.
I think like it's probably more similar to an underwater treadmill because like that for me is like I think the Ultra G is terrible. But like an underwater treadmill, if you have the money for it,
Especially
you're actually training like
Phil.
yeah, those are awesome because you can actually like train angular like strength because you have the water resistance. It's like it's unmatched unless this device, I've never seen it before.
Yeah, it's sick. Come down, I'll show you. We'll put you on it, Greg. I'll put you in the little short shorts.
You got it.
We'll get G Regulator on there. But, all right, man. I think, ready to wrap this thing up?
Are you asking
Yeah.
me? Yeah, let's do it. I thought you were talking to Christian. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Both. Why not? Greg, honestly, this has been a super fun one. This is probably one of the longest episodes we've ever had, and I think we just kind of got lost in conversation here, which is great. But before we wrap up, I'm going to give you the platform here. Look right into the camera. Choose whichever one you want. I know there's probably so many cameras that you got around you to catch every angle and jawline. But tell the people where they can find you. What's the best route to get in contact with you if you have more questions? The platform is yours, brother. Take a second.
Any scathing comments?
Take a bow.
Any scathing comments or hot takes?
No, I don't have any hot takes left. My Instagram is @_ my last name Torcaso _ For a lot of people, that's gonna be hard to spell, so I'll probably end up changing it at some point in the future. But Twitter is the same. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Don't email me, please. Just DM me on Instagram.
What are we rocking with on the drink?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what can we get from that?
Yo, you want a rating? It's
do.
gone now. It tastes smack like, I think more like a Pepsi than a Coke. But for the OG, it's pretty decent. I'd give it like an 8.3.
Whoa, pretty decent.
Yeah.
Diddy decent.
Yeah, I mean,
Diddy
for me,
decent.
like, dude, the Ghost Sour Strips is like a 9.4. So like that's like the GOAT, like S tier.
Okay. The goat fuel. Tropical berry. Lightly carbonated, more so on like the juice spectrum. Far too expensive for a 12-ounce can. The can does look kind of cool, but it definitely reminds me of like, do you remember the Dan Bilzerian when he had like I think it was like an energy drink that had like hemp in it too. It really reminds me of that, like kind of like a cliche thing that you would see on Instagram where it's like, this is cool branding. This is what you need. Like I feel like I would see like a lot of paid sponsorships from this. Proprietary blend loses me 15 cals, 3 carbohydrates. There's not a lot to love about it, but there's also not a lot to like hate. The cordyceps is pretty cool in there, although you don't know how much it is. Overall, value, flavor, ingredients, and then the look of the can, I'll probably go 6'4". If we
Dang.
learn how to edit that in to put it on there, 6'4".
Okay. Wouldn't
Um,
probably pick it up again
wouldn't
unless
probably
you're in
pick
a
it up again
pinch.
unless I was like in a pinch. Yeah, just need something and don't really care what it tastes like, but something to slam. But yeah, Christian, you want to close us out?
Yeah, as always, thank you everyone for watching. It means a lot. Make sure to go over to YouTube and subscribe. We're sitting at 99 subscribers last I checked, so we need that. We need to get to a hundy. Probably going to look to do a giveaway at 100 subscribers. T-shirt, hoodie, something from the Bev Boys shop. If you want to buy a shirt, go to bevboys.com. One of the greatest websites ever known to man. T-shirts, hoodies, multiple different designs, various colors. Follow us on Instagram, bevboys.tv, posting clips from current, past, future episodes on there. And that is collaborated with our personal accounts as well. I can be found at French_fit40 with those Bev Boys clips, as well as some training stuff thrown in there as well. Brian can be found at
BSZUTKOWSKI. Greg, I feel your pain on the trying to spell it for people listening. But we always usually put them in the descriptions of both the Spotify as well as the YouTube description. So for sure, click that link, subscribe to us, and then you can find us. That's for sure. But thank you, and we'll see
Thank
you in the
you.
next one.
Yes, sir.
Peace.
Peace.